On September 2nd, 1666, Thomas Fariner ignited a fire in a small bakery, and it quickly spread through London, tragically destroying 4/5 of this big city and leaving thousands homeless. The terrible fire turned the citizens of London against each other and tore apart the city even after it was extinguished. But over time, relationships improved and London was rebuilt. Although the city was in ruins after the fire, it ultimately led London to become the new and bustling hub of the British Empire and gave the city a fresh start into the world of safety and compromise. The Great Fire of London took place in Europe, specifically London, England. In this time period, however, materials such as brick and stone were scarce, resulting in people not thinking much of it. Because of this, almost all of the houses were built using wood and then lined with straw. The government and citizens of London neglected the need for laws and rules to make the houses stronger and wouldn't take the safety precaution steps that would later prove to be needed. Before that, however, in 1652, London was caught in a battle over trade routes with the Dutch Republic, and it quickly turned into a war. This war would prove to weaken the city as they suffered many deaths and casualties. This devastation was only the start of what would later come for London. Their state of being was one they would have to become accustomed to. This was because this war, on top of the others, was the main struggle and priority of the city, and London's ignorance regarding fire safety would prove to be a deadly mistake.
It was the summer of 1666 in London, and following a long, dry summer, the city was suffering a drought. Water was scarce, and the wooden houses had dried out. Londoners didn't take many safety precautions seriously at the time. Houses were too close together and streets were narrow. In fact, the city frequently faced the struggles of fires, yet decided not to add any additional protection against the blazes. If one did occur, they didn't have an efficient way to control it, since there were no fire engines or firemen to stop a fire from spreading. Most of the houses, if not all of them, weren't defiant against flames and would burn down rapidly.
The architecture of London was, in the 1660s, the architecture of London was a real model. I think it was, the streets, of course, were tightly packed. They were very narrow. Famously, they were built jettying out so that you may be a few 10 yards from your neighbour across the street at ground level, but your roofs might be almost touching as the first and second floors came closer and closer.
In addition, the civilians didn't realize the risk of flammability in their city and had long ignored building codes and laws that would have made buildings fire-resistant. To add on, London was in harsh condition following a deadly plague that had hit the city in 1665 that claimed 100,000 lives, a staggering 15% of the capital's population. This disease had caught the city off guard and diverted their attention away from these safety risks. Many aspects of London were attracting to fires because the city was full of sheds and yards packed high with flammable hay and straw. The preparations for fire safety were thought to be unnecessary for the city. These ignorant actions would prove to be a mistake that would change the shape of London forever.
It was nighttime in London on September 1st, 1666, when the king's baker, Thomas Fariner, forgot to turn off his oven before going to bed. At 1 a.m. September 2nd, the baker rose to an inferno blazing in his dwelling. Since many buildings at the time were made of wood and coated in a flammable material called pitch, the fire quickly spread from house to house, and soon, almost all of London was engulfed in flames. Linda McRobbie stated that the people of London were unprepared, and many of the residents of Pudding Lane were asleep when the fire began, and slow to react. Not that they could have done much beyond throw buckets of whatever liquid, such as beer, milk, or water, was on hand. The blaze was so unstoppable that people had to pull down buildings to try and block the fire's path. According to the article Great Fire of London Begins, many civilians fled into rivers and safe areas, attempting to collect their possessions before doing so. For example, people ran to the Thames River or ran straight to hills, avoiding the flames. The citizens had to decide whether they would stay and help fight the fire for their city, or if they would flee to safety. After the dreadful blaze had crept through the city for 4 days straight, it was finally controlled on the 5th day. This was all because of Samuel Pepys, who wrote diary entries during the fire, as he spoke to the Admiral of the Navy and agreed they should blow up houses in the path of the fire. They did this to create a space to stop the fire from spreading from house to house, as stated in the column The Great Fire of London.
The Great Fire started shortly after midnight on Sunday, the 2nd of September, 1666. The extent of the destruction was massive. 8 in every 10 buildings was consumed by the fire, including over 13,000 houses and 87 churches. Between 70,000 and 100,000 people were left homeless.
By then, however, famous buildings such as the St. Paul Cathedral and the Tower of London had been destroyed by the blaze, plus almost 13,000 houses and 84 churches. There were 6 recorded deaths that week due to the smoldering fire. It caused the city to be in ruins, with approximately 4/5 of it demolished. Over 100,000 people were left homeless and stranded after losing almost everything they had. The fire left the citizens in complete chaos, as it was a tragedy hard to recover from. This event devastated the people of London and left them grieving for the loss of innocent lives and their beloved city.
The sun rose on September 7th, the day after the fire was extinguished, giving light to the ruined city of London. Citizens were in disarray because, according to J. Tidmarsh, the destruction of Europe's second largest city was an economic as well as social catastrophe. Much of London's wealth was tied to property. The rich invested in leaseholds, then sold the properties to obtain a return on their money over time. Angry Londoners roamed the streets, searching for the foreigners who were thought to have started the fire. Swedish, Dutch, and French people were targeted and harmed viciously by mobs. In an attempt to control the people, the Parliament even apprehended a watchmaker from France who confessed to setting the fire, named Robert Hubert, even though there was concrete evidence that he was not in London at the time. He was executed on September 28, 1666, following a brief jury trial. This calmed the furious mobs and allowed King Charles to start taking steps toward rebuilding London. On September 10th, King Charles proclaimed that, "We've appointed Wenceslaus Haller and Francis Sandford to take an exact plan and survey of our city of London, with the suburbs adjoining, as the same now stands after the sad calamity of the late fire."
I mean, the Great Fire has had a huge legacy, something that's still studied today, it's still debated, people are still researching it, and of course in terms of the fabric of our city, the evidence of the rebuilding after the Great Fire is still here.
The streets had been so close together that flames could spring from house to house with ease. Even though it needed to be done, getting London back on its feet took longer than expected. In 1667, when rebuilding was finally a possibility, King Charles passed the Rebuilding Act, which, according to the paper, the Great Fire of London, outlawed timber buildings and all structures were to be built of brick or stone. Through these processes, London was able to get back on its feet after the tragic events of the fire.
The Great Fire of London woke its citizens up from their ignorance, which resulted in changes being made throughout the city. To start, they designed and rebuilt the city of London in accordance with new regulations that minimized the threat of such a fire taking hold again. This process took over 30 years to be completed, until the city was back to its original condition. In 1680, a man named Nicholas Barbin founded the world's first fire insurance company, aptly named the Insurance Office. He got the idea of this after the fire destroyed numerous houses and nobody had someone to lean on and help them. This became popular very quickly as people wanted assurance that they would be helped if another fire were to occur again. The idea of insurance provoked something that would still be around today. Insurance companies soon sprouted up and millions of people became protected by it. Further, the money that these companies provided went into a fund to give London their first fire brigade in 1680, a firefighting station. Even though the fire was devastating, it is also true that the fire created the opportunity to build, in the central area, a city in a new form, which would quickly become the hub of the British Empire in the decades which followed. The newer London was more protective, and even the threat of the plague outbreak had gone down because the fire had killed plague-carrying rats. Overall, the Great Fire of London may have devastated the city at the time, but the impact that it left would last forever.
The Great Fire of London was a devastating event for the city, destroying 4/5 of it and leaving thousands homeless. Although there was much conflict after the fire was extinguished, the city was finally rebuilt. Through all of this, however, it ultimately led London to become the new and bustling hub of the British Empire, with a fresh start into the world of safety and compromise. This event will be one that London will never forget, as it changed the face of the city forever.